Hi, everybody. We have an exciting webinar today. I'm excited to introduce Carolyn Wolf, who's joining us today. She's an executive partner at the law firm of Abrams Fensterman, and she's a director of the firm's mental health law practice. She is the only attorney in the country with a family-focused mental health practice. Supported by a team of experts, she specializes in guiding families through the complex landscape of legal issues that impact loved ones with serious mental illness and/or substance use. She also represents institutions such as major hospital systems, community hospitals, outpatient programs, consulting on complex matters such as capacity, mental hygiene law, and end-of-life decision-making. She has developed ongoing functioning efforts around ethics committees and advanced directives. In addition, she represents mental health and healthcare professionals and higher ed institutions. She's the past president of the National Behavior of Intervention Team Association, a member association serving more than 1,500 professionals in schools, colleges, and workplaces, whose role is to support individuals in need of mental health intervention. She has been selected to the New York Super Lawyers list since 2013 and Best Lawyers in America since 2018. She's also been selected as an honoree of the City and State of New York 2024 Above and Beyond Women. And last but not least, she is past president Association of Healthcare Risk Management in New York State and past chairperson of the Nassau County and New York State Bar Mental Health Law Committees. We were chatting a few minutes ago about her unique background with a expertise in healthcare and mental health and law, and she brings a very experienced and varied background to the work that she does. So, Carolyn, thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Can you tell us why did you decide to focus specifically on mental health and substance use law?
It actually came about through a variety of circumstances. I started my career as a hospital risk manager, hospital administrator, had a pretty solid healthcare background. I went to law school, and I was asked to do hospital commitment hearings, treatment cases, court orders for treatment. And in the course of doing that, I would have to interview families to get a background and a history and talk to them about possibly testifying. And the families would say to me, I'm happy he's in the hospital, but what do we do next? And through, speaking with a lot of the families, I saw a need for families to have the support that we offer them all these many years later. In addition, psychiatry is really the only area of medicine that's so closely linked to the legal system. Patients have to be on a legal status when they're admitted to a hospital and so on. Many of the issues that come up intersect between law and medicine. And so having that unique background certainly helped me provide services to families, bringing together the mental hygiene laws as well as the healthcare system.
And you were just saying to me earlier that you've been doing this for 30 plus years.
Yes.
So how has your perspective evolved since you've been practicing in this area? Obviously, mental health has changed with individuals and the practice of mental health has changed. But your perspective specifically, how's that evolved?
I think, in working with families as much as I do, you see what the broader issues are. You learn what the challenges are for families financially, stigma, the challenges of their loved one getting sicker and sicker, the need for early intervention, and so on. I've also seen a tremendous increase in young adults having anxiety, depression, failure to launch, as it's challenges with being in school, going to school, getting a job, where to live, and so on. So over the years, I've seen just a lot more individuals stressed and anxious, and families being challenged, as well as aging parents. That we've seen a significant increase in. We've been working more and more with parents who are aging, who've always cared for their loved ones, but are concerned now they may not be able to continue to do that. They don't want to have that responsibility put on siblings or other family members. So we're seeing an increase in that area as well.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned that we'll talk about later is the impact of mental health on the family unit. And obviously, that's a theme of these webinars, because it's not just an individual that you're talking about, but it's a family. And what's also fascinating to me is just all the other areas that you're mentioning. You're talking about the healthcare system, you're talking about the legal system, you're talking about specific subspecialties of medicine, and all these other areas that sort of come into play in what you do, especially when someone has a complex medical illness.
Yeah, and that's why we work very hard to be collaborative, to bring in other professionals who work in their areas, case management, mental health professionals, and so on. You really have to be collaborative, because there is so much overlap between offering the mental health legal services we do and the clinical services and support wraparound services that are also needed in order to get a successful outcome when one is available.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you walk us through how you typically begin working with a new family facing mental health or substance use challenges?
We get the initial call or email saying, I've read about you, heard you speak, heard you on webinars like this. We have a family member who is facing serious mental health challenges, substance use disorder, a combination thereof, and so on. So I do an initial intake for 10, 15 minutes, depending on, how long it takes to get the basic information and to be able to focus in on what the real issue is. And that's followed by a full-blown consultation. I do most of them on Zoom. I can meet people in person when they request it. But during that consultation, I lay out what are the options in the mental health legal system, in the clinical system. I explain I have a healthcare administrator background, so I know the healthcare system well. I lay out what are their loved ones' rights, what are their rights as family members, and then go through our mental health legal toolkit. What are the options that are available based on the history that I've taken? And then the goal of my consults is to come up with what I call a roadmap or a plan.
And when you talk about those different mechanisms that sort of make up your roadmap, what are the most common legal mechanisms that you use to help families?
Either there's a need for a voluntary or an involuntary hospital commitment, and we talk about what the parameters are, what the legal criteria are of that. New York, as most other states, have a mental health warrant statute, so we talk about the legal criteria and how that operates. Very often we get asked about guardianship, conservatorship. It's the same thing. It depends on which state you're in, what that buys you and what it doesn't buy you in the mental health system. And we talk about what wraparound services might be brought to bear. There are times where the legal system isn't available based on the facts that we have and the circumstances. So I like to start with case management. I like to have a team or an individual try and engage with the person, work with the family, see what we can accomplish that way before going to the heavy hand of the law, as I call it, and bringing down the legal system.
Well, I certainly, appreciate your perspective, and having worked in this field for almost as long as you, understanding the role of a team and health advisory, looking at other issues as well to support families. And one of the things that we often see is families struggling to navigate autonomy versus intervention.
Yes.
And how do you approach that?
Again, we talk about the balance between autonomy and self-rule, self-governance versus the need, and we talk a lot about capacity. Does somebody have the ability to really understand what's going on with them? As I'm sure one of the biggest challenges in the mental health field is insight, for someone to be able to say, I know I have an illness, I know I need treatment for it, I'll help you help me. And that's really one of the biggest challenges that we have. So we talk about that in terms of, allowing the person to make their own decisions. Certainly it works better if we can engage with someone and have them cooperate and work with us than work against us. But often, the nature of their illness or their substance use impairs that ability. And then we talk about what leverage we have. Is it money? Is it housing? Is it the opportunity to have certain treatment options available, and try and strike whatever balance we can?
Identifying that leverage is so key, and executing that. Do you often see, as we do, individuals who have intermittent capacity?
Yes. Well, clinically and legally speaking, capacity waxes and wanes. And it's also, in my opinion, subject specific. So, a person might do better earlier in the morning than later at night when they're tired. They may be able to understand they have bank accounts, but not understand they have an illness that needs treatment. So we need to focus on capacity based on what we're talking about. Capacity to understand the need for treatment, capacity to manage your affairs. That's the legal standard in guardianship or conservatorship. It's not a danger standard in most states, as an involuntary commitment would be, or an order of protection. It's a capacity standard, and we need to focus on the specifics of what that individual is experiencing, what signs and symptoms they're demonstrating, what the family has observed or their interactions, and then, plan from there.
We could probably spend a whole 30 minutes talking about capacity. And, when I served on ethics committees of hospitals, the first thing you learn about capacity is exactly what you just said, that it's specific to things. And capacity, I think often there's a misconception that capacity either yes or no generally. And I think looking at it as specifically as you do from a healthcare and a legal perspective is really critically necessary, and having ongoing discussions and evaluations about capacity, because we know, as we all know, things change.
Yes, they do. Sometimes more rapidly than other times, but yes, they do.
You're right. Yeah.
And that's why it's important. I mean, we talk about a diagnosis when I do these consultations, and I will say to families, it's interesting to know the diagnosis. It's important for the clinicians. My focus really becomes the signs and symptoms, the behaviors, the interactions. That's really what we need to use from a legal perspective, and is really important clinically in order to obtain, a result that we're looking for.
So you're saying what drives capacity in those decisions are behaviors more so than what a diagnosis is?
Correct. I mean, it plays a part in it. It kind of gets you on the road, so to speak. But at the same time, it's really the signs and symptoms of a person's ability to reason, their cognition, their decision-making. Can they act in their best interest? Is their judgment impaired? Can they do self-care? Can they get food in their refrigerator and know they have to eat their meals? Can they dress appropriately in the weather? And so on.
That's fascinating, and really, it's just another reason why people need your expertise when they're looking at some of these challenges. What role do you play in helping families interact with healthcare providers, insurance companies, and other stakeholders?
We're really the bridge between families and other stakeholders, as you've said. We have a wide referral network. So when I need to bring in clinicians, whether it's a psychiatrist, a psychologist, therapist, case managers, social workers, whomever it might be, we are the bridge. We make the referral. I often give a choice to families, speak to them, see if you're comfortable, see if they can provide what you're looking for. We know how to break down the subspecialties, a geriatric psychiatrist versus a child and adolescent psychiatrist, the need for social work services or case management services versus heavy-duty clinical MD medication prescription services. And the same, for insurance issues, whatever the surrounding issues might be. Sometimes we stay in the loop and provide the legal support. Other times we make that referral, and I really just stay on the sidelines, stay in the loop and informed, but let them take the major role. It really depends on the facts of and circumstances.
And it's obvious that you have a healthcare background because, as you and I both know, there are 160 subspecialties of medicine, and a psychiatrist is not a psychiatrist. And so forth. So really getting to the right people who do the right job, and just the work that Wellworth does takes a similar approach, recognizing that people like choices.
Exactly.
If we're working toward autonomy, saying here are some choices for you, as long as there are choices that are all in the interest of the client, of the patient, that often turns out really well.
Right. The other area that we work with, the other specialty, is law enforcement. Unfortunately, not very often, again, depending on the case, people get involved in the criminal justice system, or we have concerns about safety. We do in-home psychiatric interventions. I come with a team, a board-certified psychiatrist, case managers, law enforcement or former law enforcement as the need presents itself. But safety and security is foremost in my mind when we do that, or in other situations. So we do interact a lot with law enforcement, whether it's public or private, and help families navigate through those challenges as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's so many different facets of where you're interacting with, and so for families out there and other advisors, crisis management is often a really important thing to think about and to plan. So what legal preparations do you recommend families make before a mental health crisis or a substance use crisis?
Yeah, we much prefer to be proactive and preventive than in crisis or having to be reactive. It gives you time to plan, to discuss, to see what the options are. We have a 24-hour answering service, so we're available to give advice, to give a script to families if there's a need, and so on. But we also talk about the proactive. The earlier you intervene, the more boundaries you set, the more you hold the line on certain areas, money, housing, whatever it might be, the better we find is the outcome. And, it's really important for families to reach out to those who have the expertise, to really vet and investigate who has the most experience in this area, who has a proven track record. Families spend a lot of their funds on getting assistance, and you want to make sure, and I advise families to make sure that you know who you are writing those checks to and what experience, what expertise they have, how collaborative they are. No one can do this alone. It has to be collaborative in order to be successful. But as soon as there's a recognized issue, it's important to reach out and to try and bring to bear early on, what can be helpful to them.
And as a lot of the work we do is around health and wealth. And as you mentioned, financial aspects, are there other things you do to help families manage financial aspects of both legal representation and care needs?
Yeah, we have, I have partners who are very experienced in the trust and estates area, matrimonial. Our practice dovetails very closely with other legal specialties as well as medical specialties. So if there is an issue involving family law or matrimonial law, I bring in that expertise. If it's a discussion about long-term planning, wills, trusts, benefits that someone may be entitled to, I bring in that expertise. Again, we reach out and bring to bear any other, whether it's medical or legal expertise that is necessary in order for the family to accomplish the goals that they seek.
Yeah, wonderful. And a lot of what the work that you do, similar to us, is around relationships and trusts. And trust. And I'm just wondering how you view that your role around relationships with families and trust in the work that you're doing.
We get to know our families really well. Most of the time they're in crisis or heading towards crisis. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So we try to give the most accurate and up-to-date information to families. We do a lot of education, whether it's in general, giving lectures, writing articles, or it's specific to the family that we're working with. But a lot of knowledge, good knowledge, goes a long way. And so, by doing that, you actually do gain the trust and the credibility that families are seeking. I know what I don't know. I know what I know well. And I, am very open and honest with families about the realities of, can the system help them? Is there something available in the legal or the clinical system or not? And one of the biggest challenges, I think, in what we both do is expectations, managing expectations. And that's why, by being honest, by laying out facts, by demonstrating the expertise that we have, does gain the trust of the families with whom we work.
And you mentioned misinformation. I certainly hope people aren't ChatGPTing, what is capacity. I'm wondering, as we're talking about this, what some of those misconceptions are that families have out there that you're seeing.
One of the biggest misconceptions family have, or misexpectations they have, is access to information. The federal HIPAA law, the state confidentiality laws. Families often think, well, I'm the family member. They've been living with me. I've been supporting them. I should have access to information when they go to a hospital or seeing a mental health professional or a lawyer. And what we have to talk a lot about are, what are the limitations of those laws? For example, a hospital or mental health professional can confirm or deny that someone is a psychiatric patient. They can't give information, but we instruct our families that there's nothing in the law that says they can't listen. So I tell families, call, say up front, I can't confirm or deny that your son, daughter, sister, brother is a patient here. I can't tell you anything, I know that, but I can give you information. And often that goes a long way to gaining the trust and the credibility on the part of families working with mental health professionals. Sometimes I will intervene and speak to that mental health professional, again, understanding the limitations of the law, but advocating for the family with whom I'm working, and encourage them to work with the patient to get that permission to interact and to get information.
So, of course, right, a misconception around their role if they don't have access to information. So you're saying they can continue to be involved and to support, and so forth, which can absolutely make care and treatment better and get their voice heard, even if they're not receiving information.
Correct. Yes, and we will give them scripts, whether it's to call a mental health professional, to call 911. We give them a script as to what to say if that's necessary, an insurance company, whatever it might be. People are usually in crisis or overwhelmed or misinformed. It's very important, we find, to give them a script of what's realistic, how to manage their expectations, what the law says or doesn't, or allows or doesn't. But this might get you to where you need to go faster than not.
Do you find, I often find people don't understand HIPAA.
Mm-hmm.
So could you talk a little bit about how you view HIPAA and your work in that as it relates to some of the things we talked about earlier?
Well, when I give lectures or write articles about HIPAA, I actually talk about how the exceptions in the law, as well as the state confidentiality laws that every state has, it's often more important to know the exceptions than the law itself, even though, of course, you want to know both. And sometimes it's important to point out what are the exceptions. There's an emergency exception. Often healthcare providers will use the team exception. Are you part of the collaborative treatment team and therefore can get information? What are the exceptions in terms of getting information that you might need? What medications he or she has been on in the past, any side effects. There are often life and death issues based on past history that a clinician needs or a lawyer might need, depending on whether we're talking about other areas of the law. So very important are knowing the exceptions to the law and whether you fall under those exceptions, as well as the law itself.
And can you clarify, are family members required to follow HIPAA guidelines?
Yes, it's a federal statute. It covers all healthcare entities and what's called protected health information. And state confidentiality laws pretty much mirror the federal HIPAA statute. So, we instruct and inform our clients as to what those limitations are. And that's why we do give them a script or guidance for what's available to them and what is not.
Wonderful. I know we're bumping up on time. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your enormous contribution to the field of healthcare delivery, of legal work, and mental health. Your bio is impressive.